Gellert Grindelwald, Lord Voldemort, the two darkest wizards in Harry Potter, but which one of them is more effective? If they worked together, what could they accomplish? And who's the bigger threat to not just the wizarding world, but the entire world? Because make no mistake, that's what both of them want to do. Grindelwald is just much more obvious about it, while Voldemort has other goals he's trying to accomplish simultaneously. But he still wants to take over the world. That's why his supporters believe when he's traveling abroad searching for the Elder Wand that he's just trying to grow their movement. That's how Harry, Ron, and Hermione are able to trick Travers when they're breaking into Gringotts. And even Lupin's explanation to the trio for why Pius Thickness is the Minister of Magic kind of explains this also, because he's just there to handle the day-to-day stuff so that Voldemort can focus on conquest, which has to be what's motivating his most devoted followers, even if he's just throwing chum to a shark. Because yes, obviously we see in the series his most important goal is to be immortal, but this is more done out of a fear of death rather than a need to satisfy his ego, because ever since he was a small boy, he's wanted to believe that he was special, that there has never been anyone else like him and never will be. He doesn't want to just be seen as Voldemort, the leader of a pureblood movement. No, he wants to be seen as Lord Voldemort, a benevolent and merciful god. As long as you worship him and let him rule the world. And Grindelwald is pretty similar here. The big difference is more so in his public image, where he wants to be seen as a uniter of wizards so that they can all come together and defeat the Muggles. But as soon as things don't go his way, he snaps and drops all of it, even his public image. So with all they have in common, I think the first question we have to ask is, who's more powerful between the two? Because we all know the joke, Grindelwald was defeated, but at least he was close to taking over the world. Voldemort couldn't even take over a high school. But let's be honest here, they were both stopped because they made some dumb choices and were going against Dumbledore, which, yes, of course, in Voldemort's case, Harry deals the final blow, but come on, Harry wouldn't have been able to stop him without Dumbledore's help, or at the very least wouldn't have been able to do that without damaging his own soul. Obviously, Grindelwald and Voldemort never fight each other, so let's look at somebody they've both fought and kind of use them as the bar for power here. So, Dumbledore, in this case, which is kind of crazy to think about since Dumbledore's probably the most powerful wizard in the series, and even in King's Cross, when he's talking to Harry, he seems to be thinking that, oh, maybe I was a shade more talented than Grindelwald, but we were both pretty close, and I think Grindelwald would tend to agree with that, because, blood pact or not, he does plan to have Credence be the one to defeat Dumbledore for him. And Voldemort also seems to know that he can't defeat Dumbledore in a straight duel, because after they do duel in Order of the Phoenix, his plan for killing Dumbledore is to have somebody who Dumbledore trusts betray him and kill him for Voldemort. And if you think it's a stretch to say that, remember that their duel ends with Voldemort fleeing and possessing Harry so that he can at least take some control in the argument that they're having, as he's just saying, oh, I'm going to put Harry in all this pain, and if death means nothing, then just kill him for me then. End his pain. End his life. This is just Voldemort just trying to take some control because he can't win the duel, so he might as well try to win the argument to say, hey, well, death must mean something because you won't kill Harry. Because in the duel, he's been trying to kill Dumbledore and it's not working, and Dumbledore isn't even trying to kill him. You do not seek to kill me, Dumbledore, called Voldemort, his scarlet eyes narrowed over the top of the shield. Above such brutality, are you? And yes, part of the reason why Dumbledore isn't dueling to kill here could be because he knows about Voldemort's Horcruxes, and even if he were to kill him, he'd still be anchored to life, but Voldemort doesn't know that Dumbledore knows about his Horcruxes.
They don't know that we know they know we know.
And in Voldemort's mind, Dumbledore not dueling to kill him has to be an insult. I mean, he even says it in this duel. There is nothing worse than death, and what a message this sends to Voldemort, that Dumbledore thinks that he can defeat him without having to do everything possible. He's not fighting desperate and doing whatever he can to defeat him. No, he still has his morals, and he's just thinking that he can win the duel his way. So he would obviously never admit it, but Voldemort planning on having Snape be the one to kill Dumbledore and to do it in kind of a sneaky, underhanded way is him kind of acknowledging the fact that Dumbledore is just a shade more powerful than him, that there is risk if they duel. So if we're talking about Grindelwald and Voldemort and just their pure magical talent, I'd say they're about the same. So if their magical power is negligible, then what about their political power? Who builds the stronger coalition in their quests to take over the world? Grindelwald has a more traditional path to power. He's charismatic, he knows how to play on wizards' fears, and he knows how to play to an audience. One of the more interesting things about the end of Crimes of Grindelwald is when all the Aurors are showing up at his rally, and he's able to make himself look peaceful, that they're the aggressors here, and then he can send all his supporters away before he shows his true colors.
I hate Paris.
This allows him to use the democratic process to his advantage, because there will always be wizards who want to overthrow muggles, so as long as he protects his image just enough, there will always be wizards in power who will try to protect him. Let's compare this to Voldemort, who prefers to use a puppet dictatorship, as he overthrows the Ministry of Magic in a quiet coup and installs a loyalist as minister. It doesn't even matter that it's Pius Thickness. It's just anyone who is willing to do whatever he wants in exchange for a little extra power, as long as they stay on his good side. This is obviously much more fear-based ruling than Grindelwald's style, which has its advantages and disadvantages. If people are willingly following you, it does create more loyalty and also gives you more legitimacy. But Voldemort's style is probably better for squashing rebellion, though. This is again one of those times where Lupin says it best, where after the coup has happened, people suspect that it happened, but they whisper about it because there's just so much fear around that, yeah, of course there are people who are against Voldemort, but, you don't know who all of them are, so it really can make 10 men feel like 1,000, and you just have all this fear permeating, and yes, of course there is resistance to Voldemort still in Deathly Hallows, but that's because it was already there, it already existed, and you can't really create a rebellion with this much fear if people are too scared to even talk to their friends and neighbors about it. It's something that Dumbledore and Newt Scamander don't have to worry about in the Fantastic Beasts movies, because there isn't that same culture of fear surrounding Grindelwald that there is Voldemort. So for overthrowing the Muggles and establishing themselves on top of a new world order, I do think that I give a slight edge to Grindelwald here, just because, fear is obviously a powerful motivator, but if you're constantly having to fear for your life, you're only working as hard as you need to keep you and your family safe. If you genuinely believe in the cause, you're a lot more likely to go that extra mile and try to help out. And when you're as charismatic as Grindelwald is, you can also convince people that, hey, this is what I want to do. And I feel like that's a much more powerful thing to create in such a large group of people. And it's kind of the difference between a villain and a supervillain, which is of course presentation. But now I'm sure you're thinking, hey, these guys could probably work together. Their styles could work in theory. Grindelwald is much more public facing and Voldemort prefers to work in the shadows. And yes, I do agree that they would be able to work together at first, anyway. I think after a while they would just end up trying to kill each other, though, and the only way I could see them coming together is if they have a common enemy who's as powerful as Dumbledore, somebody who's stronger than they are, that they cannot defeat alone. But whether they win together or lose together, this isn't a relationship that's built to last because their egos won't allow it. One of them wants to be the master of death, and the other wants to be an immortal Dark Lord. Neither of them wants an equal. Or at least not anymore in Grindelwald's case. I think by the time that we get to Fantastic Beasts, he's done having equals. I mean, if Dumbledore were to join him, I think that he would let him be that equal co-master of death, but that's because it's Dumbledore and their relationship just goes so far back, and Grindelwald, of course, won't admit it, but there's a special place in his heart for Dumbledore, and kind of reminds me of the relationship between Professor X and Magneto, but the thing is, the relationship would have to be exclusively on Grindelwald's terms, and that's the only way he'll want it. It just shows that he has just a sliver of humanity compared to Voldemort's none. So really, if these two work together, it just makes me think of the Sith and Star Wars with the rule of two. The Padawan will always try to kill the Master so that they can become the Master, and the Master will always have to be ready for it. And for those of you who are Star Wars fans, I'd probably compare these two to Darth Bane and Darth Sidious, because one is clearly more a believer in the cause than the other, as Voldemort and Palpatine just see the cause as a way to chase power and immortality, while Bane creates the rule of two so that the Sith can rule the galaxy again, and Grindelwald wants to overthrow the current world order so that wizards can rule. But my point is, these two could never really work together because neither could allow the other to lead. Voldemort doesn't want somebody so charismatic around because then his followers may be more loyal to someone else than they are to him. And Grindelwald wouldn't want a weapon around who's so powerful that he's a threat to him and actively would work against him. At the end of the day, while these are the two darkest wizards ever, I do think that Grindelwald is more dangerous because he can be that wolf in sheep's clothing. Voldemort obviously is very great at getting you to your weakest point and getting you to follow him there, but Grindelwald can get you to your best point and convince you to follow him, that he is the one who can make it even better. So I feel like there's less limitations in how he rules because Voldemort prefers to have just this culture of fear, whereas Grindelwald tries to convince you that, hey, you and I want the same thing, and to me that's more dangerous. In a straight duel, maybe Voldemort wins. He is definitely the darker wizard between the two if we're talking just purely about how they use magic. I mean, the 7 Horcruxes alone makes that argument for you, but I think he's a little more limited in how he rules, even if he can squash initial rebellion a little better. And at the end of the day, Grindelwald may pretend to be, but he's also kind of limited because he also has to rule and be the final voice. Both of them are just limited by the fact that they have to be absolutely in charge.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
But now I want to shift the question to you guys. Who do you think is the bigger threat, Grindelwald or Voldemort? Or do you think they could work together? I mean, I definitely don't, but I definitely understand the appeal for it and what would originally get them to want to work together. I just don't think they could. I mean, if Voldemort could play nice with literally anybody, he couldn't be Voldemort, so that's all I got for you guys today. So if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this. I'll see you next time on STV.